Welcome to the 14th installment of our Game Starter series. Thanks for joining us. Tonight we're taking a closer look at the field of game data analysis, so buckle up. My name is Helen. I'm part of the Gamecity Hamburg team and one of your hosts tonight. Gamecity Hamburg is the location initiative funded by the city of Hamburg. Our mission is to support the local games industry with funding, knowledge exchange, and networking events. Before we dive into our discussion, I want to give you a quick overview of our next events. First up, next week, we'll have one of our XP Boost events. This time we're talking about finding the right price for your indie game. You don't want to overprice, but you also don't want to sell yourself short. So if you're releasing a game soon, definitely tune in. The week after that, we'll come together for a very important panel on accessibility in games. So it's all about how you can ensure everyone can play your game. We've invited some great experts for this as well, so definitely check it out. And a bit after that, you are all cordially invited to join us in Hamburg at the Jupiter, right at the city center, for our very special edition of the legendary Gamecity Treff. We are celebrating 20 years of Gamecity Hamburg, 20 years of the Hamburg games industry, and well, be there or be square. Make new connections, celebrate the past 20 years with us, and just have a great evening. Next up, let's look at our agenda. We are currently in the welcome and introduction part of tonight. Next up, we are going to introduce our wonderful panelists. Then we'll start the discussion round, and feel free to ask questions in the chat at any time. We have a lovely colleague with us who is reading your questions and passing them along to us. We will try to just slip them in when the topic comes up, but if you haven't rushed the topic of your question, we will definitely include all of your questions in the Q&A round, which will start around 7 p.m. And overall, our panel is set to end around 7:30 p.m. So keep them questions coming. Let's take a look at who's joining us tonight, who will teach us all about game data analysis. First up, we have Jonas. He's a senior team lead for game analytics at InnoGames. We'll also be joined by Yasmin Halwani. She's a data analyst at Epic Games. And last but not least, there's Kevin from IO Interactive. He is a live game director. So hello to our panel. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Great, you've all made it. First up, a very easy question. Could you introduce yourself to our audience? Where do you work? I said that before, but just a quick reminder for everyone. How did you get into the industry? How long have you been working? And also, perhaps, what are you working on right now? Maybe Jonas, you can start us off.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thanks again for having me and also Kevin and Yasmin. Yeah, my name is Jonas. I'm the lead of the game analytics team at InnoGames. And the job of my team is basically to support all of our games in basically all data-related matters. Some examples, for example, if identifying churn points to get more players into the game, but also creating business cases for new game features to reach our goals. When did I start? Actually, quite a long time ago. So I started in the year 2010 at Bigpoint, back then as an intern. And since 2013, I'm at InnoGames and as game analyst, and later became the team lead. And yeah, what am I working on right now? So that highly depends. We have a variety of games, so there are, of course, always topics for every game. But currently, our most successful game, which is Forge of Empires, we have a project running to improve the early game. So identifying, as I mentioned, like churn points. So where do have players actually problems? So checking the data, which steps are reached, what can we recommend the team to improve on? Also working on an own tutorial, like a special project. Perhaps I can talk about this a bit later. But yeah, I think that's in a nutshell for me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us. Yasmin, what about you? What are you doing right now? How did you get there? And hi.
Hello. Hi. Good morning. It's morning for me now. Yeah, hi, my name is Yasmin. I am a data analyst at Epic Games, located in Vancouver right now. Yeah, so I'm a data analyst in Epic Games Publishing. I support basically KPI, or like key performance indicator, reporting for the games that we're publishing in Epic Games. Before that, I was a data analyst at Phoenix Labs, where I worked on a live service game called Dauntless and another game that will be released soon called Fee Farm. I started working in games analytics since 2020. So it hasn't been that long. Before that, I was a software engineer in a very different industry. I was working on autonomous submarines for about a year. And before that, I was in academia mostly. My background is in human-computer interaction. And I worked a little bit there as a research assistant for a few years as well. Yeah, that's what I'm doing. Right now, as I mentioned, in publishing, I oversee the KPI reporting, basically figure out ways that we can support the games that we're publishing in Epic.
That's such an interesting career path. You have to tell us more about that later and about the submarines. But before we get to that, Kevin, hi, thanks for being here. Would you also introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Kevin Goyon. I'm a live game director at IO Interactive in Copenhagen, Denmark. I've been working in the industry for something like 12 years now. Been working on social game, mobile games, joined Ubisoft in 2013, working on The Crew. Then joined Massive Entertainment, a Ubisoft studio, working on The Division 2, and joined IO Interactive in 2018, working on Hitman 2, Hitman 3. And today I'm jumping between the different projects we have: Hitman 3 Live, our project 007, a James Bond game that we are producing, and our newly announced fantasy project, which I'm spending most of my time on right now. I'm covering different things. I'm usually at the end of the pipeline for data analytics. I'm making sure that we are getting all the information to take business decisions, build the best content for our games. I'm usually directing the content that we produce post-launch of a game and making sure that we optimize everything from player acquisition, our retention metrics, and our monetization. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome, thanks. I think we have a very, very interesting panel, 3 very different backgrounds, and I'm very excited to learn more about the field of game data analysis tonight. And to kick us off with the hard questions, we've also brought in Amanda, my colleague from Gamecity Hamburg. Maybe Amanda, you can also introduce yourself, and then I'll just hand it over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Amanda Furch. I'm a project manager at Gamecity Hamburg, and today I'm having the nice job to interview you about game data analysts and what your job is. So my first question is, what does game data analyst entail? What data do you look at? What do you do with the information? Jonas, maybe you can start.
That's trying to narrow the question down, because we are basically looking, at least speaking by myself, at basically all kinds of data. So every data point we can get, we will look at depending on the question. But I think the main focus for us is basically to check the player behavior. So if you play an InnoGames title, like for every other competitor in the market, you get a nice question in the beginning. If you agree to be tracked, which is a common practice, you get that. You kind of have to do that on app stores. And yeah, once you agreed, we can basically see all the interactions a player has in a game. And yeah, depending on the question, we can derive recommendations out of it. Check like the flow of the user, like what I already mentioned, where a player churns, or where he make a purchase, which is also important to have a business case for the games. But it can also be market-related data if it comes down to new game projects, looking at competitors, like what is currently in the app stores, downloaded, for example. And now I think I forgot the question, but lots of data.
Thank you, Yasmin. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think Jonas covered it pretty much. But I would add maybe like it depends on who's asking the questions as well and how we want to support them. Whether it's a business stakeholder or a gameplay stakeholder. Say, for example, we want to look at how successful the game is doing in terms of daily active users, revenue, in terms of churn, monetization. That is more like of a product business level. If we're supporting more game designers, then we would be looking at more like a little bit of a deeper level, such as how many players are passing a particular level, what is the game balance looking like, and things like that. So yeah, just break it down by who's asking the questions, really.
Awesome, thank you.
If I could add to that,
Yes.
I think there's also a whole part that is about the technical data, right? Like if you have an online game, how many players you are supporting concurrently, making sure that you can forecast your need for servers down the line and forecast then your business case as well.
Thank you. So what is the typical workflow in data analysis? Does it differ with different companies or team sizes? Yasmin?
Absolutely. It depends on the team size, the company as well. Again, the questions they're asking. What I really found to be like the most differentiating point is at what point in the game development cycle you're asking those questions. If it's still at the ideation point, then you're probably looking at, so for example, market data, you're looking at competitors. If it's, say, in the very early stages, then you're maybe looking at performance of the game. You're trying to gather data from playtests. If it's post-release, then you're looking at whether if it's a box product or if it's a live game, you're looking at how to improve the game further or what kind of data you need to collect to add to improve your DLCs, for example, or to improve your patches in the game. Yeah, so it's the development cycle. Like it really depends on where you are in the development cycle.
So every time you like every day you work, it can be a different situation.
Absolutely, it depends on the game as well. Yeah.
I mean, one standard is definitely, at least for me, to check the data in the morning, like what happened yesterday, because this can already spark some work. So one part is, of course, the direct interaction with the stakeholder or getting a question, but of course, we are also supposed to have like an eye on the data. So if we check, identify something where we need to take action, of course, our responsibility to get into that and inform stakeholders to make a recommendation. So I think that's, at least for speaking for me and my team, that's I think the only things we have in common in the morning, checking what happened yesterday. And then, as Yasmin said, it highly depends on the game status. So from really checking down, like even going to play individual data, if you have a new product live, at least speaking for the free-to-play industry. So if you have a game which just started, which just has a couple of users, then you might even go to an individual player level. Of course, in the end, if you have millions of players, then it's about aggregation, checking, what's happening on a global level. So that's jumping a bit perhaps at the end of the question, Rob, but that's also the fun part, I guess, about the job, because it's lots of variety depending where the game is.
Could you give us an example of something that might happen overnight and might force you to take action in the morning or alert someone?
A game breaks. I mean, probably, hopefully, our sysadmins then notice that, but it might be, for example, a new feature is live and all the KPIs look normal, daily active users, but then we see, okay, nobody actually interacted with the game feature, or I don't know, or we introduced a bug which is not that obvious, like in terms of the game totally breaks, but we see that our user acquisition is a bit lower. But why is it a bit low? Perhaps in one market happens something. So it can be anything. Of course, the bigger issues, luckily, there are some people on standby making sure that the games run. But like smaller things that still can, unfortunately, be us than to notice in the morning. Luckily, it does not happen often, but it's can happen, and it happens.
Something also like that's super interesting, Jonas. You're talking about monitoring the health of the game and finding stuff overnight. You can have released some content at some point in time, and after a few days, you can have players that found an exploit in the game, a way of clipping through walls and shooting an enemy without being shot back at. So we had that kind of situation, for example, on the Division 1. We launched one of our raid and found out after a couple of days that players were destroying the raid in a record amount of time without dying ever. And then we start investigating, looking at the data and figuring out that they are shooting at the enemy from a point they are not supposed to reach. So then you need to report that to the dev team and make sure that we patch that, we create a way of detecting those players, teleporting them back where they're supposed to be, and things like that. So for the monitoring part, it's super interesting. And then when the game is live, the data analysis can take the shape of, okay, we want to create a new feature or create new content for the players. We want to look back at what worked before. If you want to do a new cosmetic pack, for example, you want to look at your previous cosmetic pack and what sold well and what are the players enjoying wearing in the game. What do they wear most of the time when they're interacting with other players? Then you can create new content. And one of the core process of data analysis is to state hypotheses, launching the content, gathering data, and checking if your hypothesis was right or not. And then you can tweak to improve all your key performance indicators.
And to add one more thing, it's not also about what came to my mind, but about what I mentioned that a game breaks, but also, for example, A/B tests. So Kevin, you mentioned hypothesis. That's also you need time to, if you have an A/B test. So you test, for example, a new app icon, a new game entry, a new feature, which not every player gets, but just perhaps half of the user base. And then, of course, you need some time that the data flows in. And then you need to make sense of the data and then recommend an action to the game team, whether we should roll it out or we say, okay, nice try, but either iterate on that or we should rather focus on something else.
I'll add to that. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay, I'll go ahead. I'll add to that. It might not always be like bad news that the game breaks or something like that. It could be sometimes good news, you know, like you launched a very successful marketing campaign and now all of a sudden you get players from this particular country that you haven't thought of. So, you know, to focus more in the market there.
Yeah, and it also helps you make the best game possible, right? In AAA, one of the best time to look at data is when we run public tests or even private tests, closed alpha, public betas, this kind of thing. After a week of testing the game with real players, you gather a lot of data and you can look at a heat map. Where do the players go in the world? And then you figure out, oh, they never explored this really cool house and there's a super secret there. We want to help them get there, so we're gonna go back in the level design and make sure that we guide them a little bit over there. All in the service of making the game better as well, right?
Amazing, thank you. Kevin, you just mentioned AAA. Do you know if all the AAA game studios have a data analysis team?
I would assume. I haven't worked at all the studios, but I would assume, yeah, it's pretty common practice today, right? Like you're really flying blind if you don't have a data team today. But it's also really challenging because of the update cycle on AAA games is often much longer than you would have on a web game or mobile games. So when you find something out, it takes a lot of time to make new content or new feature or change it. It takes a lot of time to publish it, get it in the hand of the players. Then you need to collect enough data to be able to draw conclusions from that. So it can take 3 to 6 months before you can actually react properly on some trends you would identify. Of course, I'm not talking about emergencies like game breaking or exploits or stuff like that. I'm more talking about fine-tuning the experience, making it better overall.
So add to the question, but I also would like with this long cycles what Kevin just mentions. But if you have a live game with live ops with where stuff is happening on a daily basis, on each minute something happens. Of course, at some point there is someone looking at the data, whether it's an own team or in the product team. I think that there are different approaches to that.
So you mentioned team. How big is the team you're working on, and with which roles do you work closely? Yasmin.
Yeah, so my immediate team, like the analytics team, is quite large because we look at all of the games, basically, like the games that are released by Epic and the games that are published by Epic, and then there's also the team that looks at the games in the Epic Game Store. But if you're looking at my situation in particular, I'm more embedded in the publishing team. So the people that I interact with on a regular basis are director of publishing, marketing director, basically anyone who needs the data to support strategic decisions in the publishing department. Prior to that, when I was at Phoenix Labs, it was a very different situation. It was a much smaller studio, obviously. It was about, I think, maybe 200 to 300 people. It's not a AAA studio. So the analytics team was about 5 to 6 people. And we were supporting multiple games at the same time as well. And also the difference there is that we had we also have a live service game here too. But I mean,
Jonas, how big is your team, and which roles do you work closely?
Yeah, so my team consists out of 6 analysts, 1 working student, and we are part of an analytics department, and in total we are around 20 people. So we have a team dedicated for market research, we have a team for data mining, marketing analytics, and then game analytics. So quite, a bigger team, I would say. And we are directed we are reporting directly to the CEO. So we're not directly connected to the games, even though of course we work closely with them together. And our stakeholders, it depends. Of course, product managers and game designers are the ones we are most often talk to, and they have also most of the questions. But it can also be community management. It can be also PR, marketing as well. So depends on the question, but at least for my team, definitely it's the product, and that would be the product manager and the game designers.
Yeah, and on my end, so in the different studio I've been in, the size can vary, and it varies from project to project. At Ubisoft, because it's a constellation of studios, right? You have some centralized analytics people that can help on all projects, mainly on the business side of things. It's really well distributed in that sense. And then on the gameplay side, you would have probably something like 3 analysts and 2 programmers dedicated to BI. Similarly, at IO, we try to have a structure a bit like that, with both embedded analysts and centralized analysts.
Thank you. So my next question is a bit more hands-on. What are the tools you use for your analytics the most, Jonas?
Depends, but there can be a bit more specific. So at InnoGames, we are basically a Microsoft infrastructure company. So we have, for example, an analysis queue. So that's what I meant when I look at the data when I start working, because that it's processed overnight, and then we have aggregated data, so that you don't need to run an SQL query, for example, to get info. So you have predefined KPIs that runs through the night, and so in the morning you can look at everything which happened from yesterday on. And this is then ultimately, if you want to access the data, then it's Excel. So perhaps a bit boring for the folks now listening, but yeah, Excel, at least for my team, is definitely one of the main tools. A bit more interesting, also, even though it's Microsoft, is Power BI. So you might heard of Tableau or other interactive dashboard softwares, but Microsoft definitely is currently doing quite a good job. And especially if you are, have a Microsoft infrastructure, so that's also something which we use heavily to create interactive dashboards to bridge the individual data query on SQL level to have something in between where we can then set up, okay, I want to look at user behavior, which is not in our aggregated data, where you typically have to run an SQL query. But then we create an interactive dashboard so the product manager, the game designer, or management can look at user behavior without having to know the queries. That's for my team. So Excel, Power BI, but also SQL queries, of course, you have to know them. Then for the other teams in our analytics department, definitely also Python, R is used, but I think Python is currently winning over R. That is at least what I hear. But yeah.
Kevin, how about you?
Yeah, so more at the end of the pipeline, like creating the dashboard, answering the question, and making reports. Yeah, I've been working with Tableau, and today we are working mainly with Power BI. And as Jonas said, it's really a nice tool because it's friendly for people who are used to the Microsoft ecosystem. You can use many of the things you learn from Excel and port it there. Yeah, you don't need to know the language because it's really visual. There's even some natural language questions that you can ask, like how many players did I get that month and that own this kind of content. And if you built your model correctly, Power BI will answer that question and even make a graph for you. So that's really cool, and I can't wait to see what they're doing with all the AI advancement that we've seen lately, because yeah, that's gonna be really natural to ask all those questions directly to the data tools.
That's cool. On my side, I'm working mostly with Tableau. Another tool, I mean, obviously, is SQL in all of its flavors. And Python. Previously, I worked in the Google cloud platform. So BigQuery and what was the tool that I used for visualization? Data Studio, which was renamed later to Looker Studio. Yeah, but for someone who's starting, I would recommend just learning the basics of SQL and Python just to get started.
Thank you so much. My next question is, what was your most unusual or surprising task in data analysis so far? Kevin.
You need to give me a minute to think about it, because I'm not doing the analysis usually, not directly. But not necessarily surprising, but really satisfying is when you start having your early public test of a game, and you start getting data and the players are not behaving as you expect. For example, they're gonna go through a level and you see that half of them die and not finishing the level. You think, oh, the level is really, really hard. That must be why. And then you start looking into it, and no, the players just get lost or get bored, or they don't understand what's going on, right? So you need to change your perspective on how to improve that content, not necessarily. You need to go deeper into your analysis, basically. So then you need to break down, okay, they die in this level. Now we're going to slice it into 5 segments. Let's look at each segment. Where do they die? Or they die in the 3rd segment. What's going on there? And go deeper and deeper. It's really investigative work. It's super exciting. I really love that.
Thanks, Yasmin. What was your most unusual or surprising task?
So I would say it's like part of the process of being an analyst. Before I became an analyst, I didn't really expect that I'm going to be spending, for example, a lot of time just understanding the data before I go into producing any meaningful insights from it. A lot of it includes, for example, understanding what the telemetry is, when does it run, and how does it run, what triggers it, cleaning the data as well as you're getting it. A lot of the times when the telemetry has been integrated, say, for example, years ago, the person who has integrated it is no longer working at the company, and you have to figure out how does it work. And that takes a lot of time. And it's what's really surprising is the amount of time that sometimes you have to spend to just manage expectations with stakeholders, just to let them know we are spending a lot of time now just figuring out that data. Or sometimes you would be getting questions like, how did this particular feature do? And the answer is, well, we haven't integrated telemetry. We can't really tell you. So it's just managing expectations and understanding your data and cleaning it before you get into all the exciting parts that Kevin mentioned of like investigating the data and getting insights.
I have another small story where data analytics influenced the game. So in Hitman 2, we launched the game with, so in Hitman, we have the concept of elusive target. It's a time-limited event where one target comes in one of the existing location and you need to eliminate it. And if you fail, it's out, you'll never get another chance, unless we re-roll the content. So we had this event with Sean Bean playing a character coming to our Miami location, and the players could kill him 1,000 different ways, right? And after the event run, we ran the data and found out that a large majority of the players would kill him with a pen in the eye. Sorry for the gruesomeness here. It's a assassination game. So when we decided to rerun the event and have this character come back, which is part of the background of the character that is the Undying, when he came back with an eye patch as a nod to that. We also have a cook in the tutorial of the game that gets slammed a lot with a pan. When we launched Hitman 2 with the tutorial revamped, we added bandage around his head and him commenting about the fact that he's having terrible headaches or something.
Jonas, do you also have a story to tell?
Yeah, I have. Unusual, I couldn't think of any because part of the job to get unusual questions, so nothing that sticks out, but surprising, lots of surprising moments, to be honest. So two stories I can share. Also a couple of years ago, but it was for me an eye-opening analysis I did myself for the competitiveness of the mobile market. So back then we ran an analysis on the first 10 game sessions of a player, and we noticed how early you need to convince a player, especially in the mobile market, to stay. So for example, if the decision, if a players, if you think of free-to-play games, of course you have the option to pay money for special items and stuff. How early a player decides to pay. So that could be like within the first 10 minutes, which is or even earlier, depending on the game. So the first impression, you do not have much time to convince the player to stay in the game and actually to spend money on the game. And that was quite eye-opening, also to drive our user acquisition, or to also to manufacture our early games. Before that, we more had the idea, of course, we have at least 1 or 2 days to convince the player, but no, please really make sure the first session is engaging. So that was for me eye-opening, and also for the company. And then later on, a more like a fun story, which connects to some interesting aspects of the work, not naming the product right now, but analyzing a feature which gives out a special a resource, and then we notice it's completely broken. Players get millions of those points, let's call it points, and but the game was still running great. So the bad part about the question, so nowadays we never will do that again. But actually the product manager, but also we didn't sort of, okay, what will we actually do with the data? So the question came, so check out the feature, and then we noticed, okay, it's completely broken, but the game is actually doing fine. So what will we do? So that And actually, I think we didn't even change something about it because the game is running. But particular, the game was based on the question broken. But yeah, that connects to one interesting aspect that I mentioned before. You definitely need to know what you want to research, and then also what you will do with the data. If you don't have a hypothesis, also if you do not have an action point, then you come into the point where you have meetings and look at the data, and everyone goes, "Wow, but yeah, what are we doing now?" Because no one did expect that. And on the other hand, also very interesting takeaway for me, because this game has also a PvP element, was for me that even though for us at that point it looked like to be broken, but since you had the PvP element, it balances somehow out. So other players, of course, also had to exploit the specific feature, also had millions of points, but in the end, since there was competition involved, actually the game didn't hurt because of that. So that was quite interesting for me.
Thank you. So to sum up this first block about your job, what questions do you have to keep in mind and ask yourself regularly while being in a job? Yasmin, maybe you can answer that.
Why am I analyzing this data? To begin with, like, how is it, like Jonas mentioned, like if you don't have a hypothesis, you don't have a plan for what you're going to be doing with the data afterwards, the reaction you're going to get is like, cool story, bro, and move on, you know. Like, so you need to make sure that the data is actionable, and have that discussion as early as possible with your stakeholders. As soon as you get a question, a lot of the times the questions you'd be getting would be very pointed and directed questions. For example, how many players are passing level 3 in the game? The question is, you should be answered, like your answer should be, why do you want to know that? How is this going to support the game? What are you planning to do with that data? Say, for example, and then also like run the stakeholder with some scenarios. Go like, okay, so if we find out that a lot of players are dropping at level 3, what are we going to do about it? If we find out that a lot of players are passing level 3 quicker than they should, then what are we going to do about that? So that is like questions to ask the stakeholders, but also as you're analyzing the data, always ask the questions to yourself of, well, what does that data mean? How is this going to support my stakeholder? Are there any other influencing factors? And also don't get into rabbit holes too much. It's a mistake that I had to learn the hard way.
But it's so satisfying.
I know, you want to know what happened.
Yeah, I guess to jump on that, I think that Yasmin perfectly made the point. There's so much data out there. It's so interesting. You can spend weeks just looking at tiny fraction of data. But I think our job is to steer the stakeholders to clarify the question. So if you get a question, what do you really want to know? What do you want to do with it? To make progress and also to reach the business goals we've been setting. Otherwise, yeah, it's a fun project. In university, you may have time, but unfortunately, in our world, in the business world, time is limited, and you really need to focus and to make sure that you have something where you can act on.
Kevin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, there's one question you don't want to ask yourself is, can I trust that data? You want to be able to trust that the data you're getting is good. There's a huge part of the work that is cleaning up the data and making sure that it's trustable, right? So yeah, that's a question you don't want to ask yourself. But something to keep in mind is also, to not let your biases influence the way you're looking at data. For example, I was talking earlier about cosmetic skins and stuff like that. You would think, like, when you create new skins, you're like, okay, we want to do something that is appealing, that looks nice, that has nice colors, nice shapes, nice stuff like that. And then you look at the data and you realize, like, no, what players want, it's rainbow-shaped unicorns. And yeah, you need to be humble, because usually you get that result and you're like, no, there's a bug, there's something wrong. I'm gonna talk to the analytics team. Like, that's not possible. They can't like that. But if you can trust your data, you'll find out that you're more often wrong than right with your assumptions.
Yeah, one thing I will add to that is openness is very important. So we also had at one point the case that one game team planned a series of A/B tests in a game. Of course, we supported them, but at one point, even though the A/B test did not turn out to be successful, the game team said, yeah, but we need it because we planned the other A/B test building upon that. So the whole roadmap was basically built on a success. So they didn't even think of that it could fail. So I think that's also a point where we need to be as close as possible with the stakeholders to also be aware of the roadmap, to be aware of the plans, and to point them into, steer them into the direction that they are not have to rebuild their roadmap because they unfortunately did not expect the unexpected, like the Rambo unicorns, whatever that can happen.
There's also something to keep in mind is that usually dev teams will look a lot at the feedback they're getting from Reddit and the forums and YouTube reviews or whatnot, right? But those are usually a really vocal minority, and the data might tell a very different story. So it's important also to be able to jump quickly in the data and get some preliminary counterpoints to what the narrative seems to be when you look at social medias and whatnot.
Thank you so much. I will now hand the mic over to Helen, who will ask you questions for the career starters that are watching right now.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing about your day-to-day job so far. Very interesting. Also, just personally, I think the job itself sounds really fascinating. So I'm sure we'll have some people watching who might now consider jumping into data analysis as a job. And to those, we want to give the best information on how to make this dream possible. And so let's start with the first question on what a career starter should bring to the table. We already heard from Yasmin that she worked in academia before. But I'm sure there are loads of ways to get into game data analysis. So first up, does someone in game data analysis necessarily need a formal education, or is that more of a nice to have in your experience? Maybe Jonas, you could share on that.
I mean, if that's the most gifted person in the world, of course, there's no education needed, but typically it's at least a bachelor degrees in some way. I would recommend it. Typically, depending on what your field you're doing your university degree on, there might be some projects you run into. That it's not too important which field it is, but I would look out for some stuff like empirical research, some statistics. I think that is quite beneficial. But most importantly, for me, if I have interviews or we have a job opening, is really the passion for games. So if you can be an analyst for basically anything, but at some point you need to understand why someone is playing or investing, I don't know, 100 hours for, I don't know, grinding a dungeon in Diablo to get the perfect item. You don't need to be the person, but you need a basic understanding of that. That's something I would definitely look for, because otherwise it's, you need also, in the end, the passion need also be in the game. We are creating products which might be the sum of all the parts, might be in theory perfect, but in the end, it's still a creative product. It's still something which we had the discussion before the panel started, the fun part, which at some point you can measure it, but you cannot really plan the fun. So that's why passion, motivation for games should definitely be on the table. Must not be the must not be the pro gamer or the I don't know, the hardcore idler, whatever, I don't know, but you need to understand why people are interested in games, and if you combine that with some university background where you have some empirical stuff or even also informatics if you did that, but I think that needs to come together.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense from everything I learned at university so far. But it all sounded very familiar with some stuff like data research and stuff like that. Maybe, Kevin, what's your experience like of all the teams you've worked in? Were there also some people that didn't have a bachelor degree? Like, how did they make their way into the field?
I think some of the most talented data analysts I've worked with were actually self-taught. They might have had a background with computer science, programming, game design, but the common traits they had were that they were extremely curious and were able to think very logically about the systems that the game is built on. So they could connect the dots. That's actually really the thing. And like Jonas was saying, like you need to have a good sense of what's going on. And I think it comes down to intuition. You need to have a good intuition of why things trickle down the way they do. So you can go upstream and figure out what is the common cause of one result. But you need to be a good communicator because there will be a lot of, usually data analysts are very, very smart people, but they need to dumb it down to talk about their craft so we can talk about the same thing. So really good communicators, really logical thinking, a taste for investigating stuff. I think that's the main things I can think of.
Mm-hmm. Makes total sense.
Something I want to add as well is that it's a job that is very in demand, and the demand will continue. And it's also a skill set that is extremely portable to other industries. So you could start outside of game industry and come in the video game industry. We have actually one analyst that come from banking, I think. And the other way around, you could work in the game industry and then jump out and do something else for a while.
Or, as we've heard before, you can work on submarines and then go into the games industry. So,
there you go.
Which brings me to you, Yasmin. Anything you want to share on that, or?
Well, on submarines, I didn't really work on analytics. I was a software engineer developing the user interface. So it didn't exactly translate into games analytics. But I was interested in understanding how the pilots use the interface and what they're doing actually when they're using the submarine. So that's kind of what triggered me to change my career. That combined also with my background in academia, where I was basically doing research, and all that I was doing is like create hypotheses and validate them through running user studies. So I would say from my background in human-computer interaction research, what really helped me was creating this critical thinking mindset, where I'm not going to confirm that some information is correct unless I have a hypothesis and unless I have tested it. Basically, be always skeptical until you actually have a proof otherwise. So that's in terms of like critical thinking skills. If you have it through academia, that's great. If you don't have it through academia, there are many other ways to build that skill. In terms of the hard skills as well, it is important. It's but it's something that you can build over time. Like basically soft skills, I think, make up the majority of what we're doing. And if all you can do is like, write code, SQL and Python, that's great, but you really need to build on the soft skills as well. And that could come from a variety of sources.
Something you were talking about also, Yasmin, earlier, like about knowing why you're analyzing something, and the soft skill of being able to tell a story is super important.
Also to add to that, if you're a game starter, a real game starter, like someone looks out for a junior position for data analyst, I would definitely agree that soft skills definitely outweigh the hard skills. So there are different tools, times are changing. If you're curious, if you're motivated, you will definitely learn also other tools. It would be great, of course, if you somehow know one tool or know how to handle data at least in some way. But other than that, the motivation is at that point, and the curiosity key, definitely.
You've already answered like almost all of my questions. Which hard skills, which soft skills, and educational background did you need it? That's great. So the most important question most people might have now, after hearing how great your job is and how interesting and passionate everyone who does it has to be, is where do you start if you want to become a game data analyst? Like, where should people start to look? Where should they dig into? What would be the best way to enter the industry? Yasmin, maybe because it's been more recent for you, could you share how you landed your first gig?
Yeah, absolutely. So while I was working on submarines, I was also working on a kind of a passion project at the same time. I worked on a mobile game with my friends. I wasn't really doing data analysis. I was mostly like trying to, I guess like it was like qualitative and quantitative data. I was doing a little bit of user research, trying to run play tests and diary studies, and things like that. From that, I was able to really gauge my interest and make sure that this is the career switch that I want to do. That I want to be looking at insights from a video game and support decisions made on the game based on those insights. So it helped me in that way, like for me confirming that that's what I want to do, but also it helped me build a very nice portfolio. So when I was interviewing with Phoenix Labs, we ended up talking about that. We ended up talking about my background as well, as I mentioned, like all the different research projects that I worked on that are non-game related. And the types of analysis that I did in that field as well. So if you're starting out, I would recommend build a portfolio, pick a game, maybe if there is like a passion project kind of game with your friends, maybe hop on and try to analyze some data like I did. If not, there's a lot of open data sets online. For example, I think Steam has an open source data set that you can just go pick at it and start analyzing, maybe build a Kaggle profile and showcase your analysis. Yeah, that's what I think is the starting point. And then just start interviewing, build your network, try to talk to different game developers, understand what they're doing, and then from there, go ahead and apply to jobs.
Sounds like a plan. Jonas, do you have anything to add to that?
Not much. Perhaps since I think I skipped that, for me it was actually an internship because during my university I definitely focused on computer games. So I wrote already my bachelor thesis about computer games, and also took every seminar which was loosely connected to games, but I didn't imagine myself working in the industry. And then a friend of mine just said, okay, why don't you try it out? And that was for me like the eye opener, because I also couldn't really imagine that it's possible to work in games and to make money, which is definitely the case. You can do that. But other than that, I think there are, of course, if there are job openings, every bigger company or smaller company will definitely use the typical job portal. So yeah, be aware of those. I mean, go to events like Gamecity events, for example, can also be a good connector. Be present, or if you're not sure, there are also working student position open for some companies. Perhaps it's also a good way to during university to check out whether that's something for you. There are various ways, but I think if you're interested in games, if you're interested in data, there's definitely a way to get into the industry.
Great, thank you. Kevin, you've already unmuted yourself.
I like the answer of Yasmin with find a public data set and start doing some analytics of it. You can find the monthly active users of most game. For Steam, for example, pick a game, look at the activity and figure out, oh, there's a huge spike. What happened there? Start looking into, did they run a sale? What do you see on Reddit around that date, kind of thing, and try to build the case, because when you come to an interview with someone like me and you say, yeah, I've done this thing because I thought it was super interesting, that piques my curiosity and that gets me excited about you. It's like, it's not just, oh, that's my job. It's actually, I'm excited about figuring out how things work and why things happen. So that's that's for me the greatest advice. I know that there are some YouTubers talking about data analytics and recommending to go through the Google curriculum where you can start building your portfolio. Some really interesting stuff. I have some friends that started doing that. I think that's a really good start. And something I think you need to know also when you're looking to start in the video game industry is to not be picky about the companies or the games, because the video game industry is full of amazing people to work with and the game don't matter that much at some point. My first game was a Facebook social game where you would invite your friends and stuff like that. Then I worked on an MMO for 6 years old little girls. And all those experiences were amazing. I was a gamer at heart, but it was amazing to work on those games because you would have a chance to have an impact, and it forces you outside of your comfort zone and working with wonderful people all around. So yeah, don't be picky. Just get started.
Awesome. There was a question from the chat actually just now, which you might be able to answer, Kevin, which is there a content creator, YouTube, Twitter, anything like that, who specializes in data analytics and that you follow and could recommend to the audience?
So I don't know about video game analysis specifically, but I know that, yeah, there are some YouTubers. There was one that is called... his name, The Data Scientist, or something like that.
Okay. I'm sure if someone types that in, they can find that. But maybe Jonas, Yasmin, maybe there's someone you know that you would recommend to the audience.
I can. What I'm looking partially is Deconstructor of Fun, for example, the webpage. They go into games. That's very interesting because it's really going to the heart of the games, why games work. Apart from that, no, I'm actually not into the data analyst influencer scene, to be honest, so I can't share anything there.
There are two that are quite interesting. Alex, the analyst, that has a lot of video, and someone called Stefanovic. They have some good starter videos.
Great. Yasmin, anyone besides Alex you would recommend?
I was thinking of the same person,
okay.
actually. Yeah.
That's a vote of confidence.
Yeah, it's really good. Real entertaining videos. I would also recommend not just YouTubers and streamers, but also be involved in communities. I just remembered the IGDA actually has a data analytics group that you could join, and a games user research group as well. So it's that's another way to actually speak with data analysts and with games user researchers and understand what they're doing, and they can point you to a lot of resources too.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I'll hand it back to Amanda now to get some more practical tips and tricks in. Amanda, you are on mute.
I'm so sorry. Yes, I just noticed I wasn't unmuted. Sorry. Just a second. Oh, yeah. The first tip that would be useful for people would be like, based on your experience, is there a common mistake or misconception about the industry or about data analysis in particular that you often encounter in career starters? Jonas.
Not specifically, but I think we covered the topic. I think for some, it's just about tools, I would say. So then that might be a common thing that, I don't know. I know this and that on a scale of 1 to 5 by 5. So I'm the best person for the job. But actually, in regards of games, that's the person's not that into games. So again, coming to the point that at least for starters, the motivation at least or definitely is better than or more important than the hard skill. But other than that, I can't think of anything else.
I would add to that is as you're starting out in games analytics, sometimes the game team might not be thinking about the data as early as would probably benefit them. So just to be proactive, like the misconception is that they're always thinking about the data and you're going to be analyzing and supporting all the time, which is what you should be doing. But also being proactive is very important, and making sure that the team is thinking about the data as early as possible.
Kevin, do you have anything to add to that?
Not specifically, no misconception, but find the people that are interested, because there are some, like in the game team, in the publishing team, in the marketing team. And yeah, when you get started, especially if it's a small team, you might feel a bit like, yeah, what am I supposed to do next? But just, yeah, get data, get questions, find questions, get people to give you questions they want answers to. It's super satisfying.
Is there anything you wished you had yourself, like you had known before entering the industry or when you were a career starter that you haven't covered yet? Jonas?
Yeah, not specifically, but I mean, perhaps that of course it's lots of fun to work in the game industry. Very like-minded people. You can talk about games all the time, but ultimately it's also work. that's something to share. Yeah.
I think that's my favorite thing about working in the video game industry, is that you don't have to do small talk, because you just ask, what game are you playing these days? Or what's your favorite game? And then you can go on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of a slippery slope, and you really need to keep your biases in check. So for example, if you're working on a game that you really like, you might be a little bit biased in your analysis. So you gotta like always ask yourself, am I analyzing this data because is gonna benefit the game, and that's the questions that the stakeholder is asking, or is it because I'm just curious? Which is great. You be curious and you analyze your favorite game, but also always keep the business in mind.
Thank you. So is there anything else you would like to tell our audience about the job or the fields of expertise? Kevin?
No, nothing specifically. I mean, it's we've all said it. It's awesome to work in the video game industry. It's very open. You often can jump from role to role and explore different roles. At least in the companies I've been working in, I could always, if I was interested in another field, I could go and try and see if that fits me. So there's no. I think the most important is to get the first foot in a studio, and then yeah, you can figure out what place you're gonna take in that company.
Yasmin, is there anything we didn't cover yet?
Not that I can think of. I don't know, it's a fun job. Try it out.
I can add something. Talking about the future, I think what's really interesting, first of all, yeah, it's a great job, and it's connected to all departments, all stakeholders in the game industry, which is totally great. But yeah, I think we briefly covered the topic. I think the more advanced the technology goes, I think the more hands-on and the more impactful, if you can frame it like that, the work will be. So like when I started, was enough to fetch data. So you have a question, and you can do an SQL query, or you can use Excel, and that was, wow, you're a great analyst. That was 10 years ago. That was enough. Nowadays, you typically have automated systems to get all the basic data. It's ready when you start your working day. So the difference and the future is definitely to be more hands-on, to work more closely with the game teams, to be part of the execution, and this is for me very, very interesting. And so even though and in the future, so if you're interested in other fields, you definitely will have a chance. Or I think it's also a perfect opportunity, perhaps at some point, to go into product management, because product management highly relies on data. So if you have a data background, that's a perfect match. Or game design, the same, or other way around, coming from game design into analytics again. So I think it's connected. It gets more hands-on, and you have all the opportunities.
It's an amazing skill to have in any other job. Yeah, to be able to gather data and draw conclusions. Yeah, as you say, if you work in product management, marketing, production, stuff like that, amazing skill.
Thank you. Like I'm really motivated now to get myself some free data and start analyzing.
That's
But
the big problem after these events. Every time I'm considering a career change, because all the experts make the job sound so awesome.
Absolutely. And with that, I will hand the mic over to Helen, who will ask one last very important question and then get to the questions from the chat.
Yeah, sorry, I basically already wrangled it. Just as an info for the chat, we asked beforehand if there are any open positions in game data analysis at the companies of our three wonderful experts. And there's actually an opening in game data analysis over at IO Interactive. Kevin said it's fresh from the press. The news just got out. It's a mid-level position, I'd say. You need a bit of experience, couple of years, but maybe someone's watching and really wants to work with Kevin right now. I would definitely work with him. Sounds like a fun job, fun team, and lots of interesting tasks. So check it out, but also check out the career pages of Epic Games and InnoGames. There's nothing in game data analysis right now, but there are definitely other interesting tasks always opening. And as you saw, also more wonderful colleagues. We actually had a couple of more questions from the chat. Keep them coming. Now, gate is open. We introduced one question before, but now we have some more specific ones. And the very first one is a very practical one. Someone asked, say you are a very small indie dev team or a solo dev, and you think about collecting data to help balance your game. How do you get user content, and is there legal stuff you need to watch out for? Big question, I think. Maybe Jonas, you have some experience with that.
I didn't really get the question, to be honest. So
oh,
what
okay,
about
sorry.
content?
They are basically asking, they are an indie team, so they don't have a lot of resources, but they also want to start collect data for their indie game. And they're asking, is there anything on the legal side to consider when collecting data? How would they even collect the data, I think? And how do they get the user consent to collect the data?
Okay, didn't the user consent? Yeah, you have to ask for it. I think there's no way around it, but I think it's common, and nothing bad about it. You have, I think, on every web page you have the consent for cookies and stuff. So, but I'm not a legal expert, so I'm sorry for that. I think there might be another panel for that. But there are some rules, especially in European Union GDPR. So be sure that you have your terms and conditions set up, that you ask the player. And I think most important, that what I remember once we were hit by making sure that we comply with GDPR, is that you have a use case for the data. So I think once you ask the user, and if they agree, that's I think the main thing. But after that, you are by law not allowed to just collect data if you're not if you don't need it. So, for example, very stupid example, but for if you're looking for balancing the game, and you ask for the gender of the player, which might not be the interesting question at that point. So then there might be, if someone asks you or gets the lawyer in a play, and why do you even collect the data? You're not doing anything with it. Perhaps you're doing something else with it, not what you propose to do. That might be an issue. So be open about that. And and technically wise, that's it. Unfortunately, not my field of expertise. You should, I think, have a big Hadoop database or some database, good devs, and make sure I think once I was in a conference, and also some indie developer asked me what is the most important KPI I should track, and I said, yeah, it depends. So there's no simple answer. I think if you the one who asked the question, if you followed the panel, make up your mind. What do you want to know? Have a hypothesis. What do you want to act upon? What's important for you? And then get the tracking into your game. And you don't need to track everything. I think if you have a good sense what you want to know, some basic tracking might already be enough. So some simple stuff, you do not need to go into every detail. At some point, it's also not too good, because at some points you might want to aggregate data anyway. So I know I think I talked too much. But yeah, try know what you want to track, make sure that it's transparent, that user agreed, and then I think you're fine.
Great, thank you.
I think from the technical side, there are a lot of SDKN providers. They might be free and they might be paid above a certain threshold, but if you reach that threshold, you're probably doing good enough anyway. So I know that Unity has their own services. For example, if you're making your game in Unity, I think PlayFab integrate well with most engines. So there are solutions out there.
Yeah, they mentioned in the question that they're using Unreal Engine, but I think it applies for them as well. All right, I hope that answered your question. And also there was a follow-up question to that, actually. Dear panel, do you think it would be worth the effort in this scenario as an indie game developer? Do you think it's worth the effort trying to collect data and trying to read this?
I wanted to tell, Jonas mentioned Deconstructor of Fun earlier. It's an amazing blog where they're taking games and deconstructing why they work, why they don't work, what expectation you can have from the game. Just reading those posts help you understand why you should track data. Because, for example, you want to do a mobile game, they are talking a lot about first day retention, first week retention. And just understanding how that works is critical to the success of your game.
Makes sense. I think the other two are nodding along. So, oh yeah, Yasmin?
Sorry, Yasmin, please go.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I would say just depends on why you need to collect data. Again, depends if like your indie games, say for example, gonna be live, you're gonna be adding any additions to it afterwards, you're gonna be releasing patches, DLCs, then maybe you want to track what players are doing in the game, so you would focus more on that when you release your DLC. If it's you're tracking just for the sake of tracking, then it might be a waste of time.
One thing I want to add is don't forget the qualitative data. So I think we talked a lot about quantitative data, data tracking, but it most likely will not tell you the why. So you have data on, okay, how many players reach level 3, 5, whatever, but what is the experience? What do they feel? What do they expect? Whatever. So for that, a simple survey is always a very good way to go, or a small user test. I don't know, if you're indie, gather some friends, have them play your game, collect qualitative feedback. It sparks good starting point. It might not apply to the whole user base, but from my experience, issues, even though you have just a 5-person user panel, it's always a very, very good starting point. And most likely, if everyone in that panel agrees that something is not right or could be improved or is great, then that probably also reflects to the user base, even though you should definitely then go to user tracking. But just to mention, qualitative data should not be forgotten.
Awesome, thank you. There was another question. A user asked, do you use any kind of system like Zoo, for example, to benchmark? How do you face a market analysis? I'm not entirely sure if those two questions are one, like belong together. You have to tell me that.
What was the end of the question? How do you face?
How do you face a market analysis?
So just answering for myself. So we are using Newzoo, for forecasting. So you want to look at what other games similar to yours are out there. You can Newzoo is a platform providing data on acquisition, activity, retention, monetization of all games for the last 3 years or something. So you can look at existing games and try to find trends. You find comparable numbers. If the game you're gonna make has a direct competitor, you can look at how many players did they get the first month, how fast did they drop, why did they drop, what can you do to make it better, these kind of things.
Sounds super interesting. Thanks.
Might add to that, there are also several other services available, especially for app stores like App Annie or Sensor Tower. We also use them. Unfortunately, most of them are quite expensive, at least from a viewpoint from an indie developer. So yeah, you need to think about whether you go for it. And you also have to, even though that's great data, but you also have to take in mind that it's not like perfect. It's not looking like on your own data. So if we benchmark our own games against those services, they can be up to 50% off for the data. So it's a good trend. It's a good to make sure, like especially if you go for a new game, to analyze the market. But the more you go into detail for those services, you have to be cautious.
We mentioned Steam database earlier. That's a good starting point for free as well. And most of the things you can find on Steam would behave similarly on other platforms. Maybe not mobile and Steam games, but if they are double-A games kind of things, they might.
There's this website called Steam Spy that you can take a look at. It's basically looking at like pulling data from that public database and just analyzing it. So it saves you a bit of work.
Are you even an indie dev if you don't know Steam Spy? I think it's one of the most recommended tools I've ever heard about. Seems to be great. Yeah, if there are any other questions from the chat, keep them coming. We've got a couple more minutes left. In the meantime, I would have a question to Jonas as you are in the mobile department. Did the recent change in regulations over the past years and also like the Apple initiative to like push more towards data protection, did that change your job in any way, or is that just to be expected and you just need to shift your data points a bit?
It definitely changed. I'm also a user, so from my point of view, of course, more privacy is great. But also, to be honest, for a company who's dependent on user acquisition on performance marketing, that's definitely a hard hit. Basically, what it does, so there are ways to work around that, and of course, ultimately, some users can still opt in, but the majority does not. So you have only a fraction of users who opt in, and then you have to extrapolate the data of those users to the other users. So it's definitely making the game harder. And ultimately, if you look at, especially in the mobile game world and for free-to-play games, where you have a business case of how much you pay for user acquisition and then how much you make per user, what the lifetime value is, it basically makes your business funnel, it makes everything harder because basically it just gets more expensive because you cannot target users as good as before. And if you cannot target users as good as before, it basically just means you have to pay more money because you have to reach more users to get the ones you want. So yes, that's definitely something the whole industry is facing. If you have a more casual portfolio that's not too severe, the more you're like for mid-core or hardcore games, then you definitely will have noticed that.
Interesting, thank you. Yasmin, Kevin, anything that influenced your jobs recently, like in that department, or doesn't play as much of a big role to you? Okay, makes sense.
Just we talked a little bit about GDPR and regulation early on. Just something that comes to mind also, when you start tracking data, you need to be able to provide that data. If a player was to send you an email, they need to have a way of contacting you. And if they were to ask you, I want all my data, you need to be able to provide it in a timely manner. And you need to be able to delete it and not break all your system down the line. Just an example. And that's always a headache in analytics teams.
Okay, to the person who asked about any legal troubles regarding data analysis, this one's for you.
Also, just to add to that, if you can get a lawyer, just to make sure that everything is in check when it comes to data.
Yes, you can't.
Even though they will also tell you it depends. So we also have a legal department, but it's and they're doing a great job. But of course, in court it can go either way. So I think for all the GDPR stuff, you have reasoning. You have to have reasoning, and great to point that out, Kevin. Also, you have deletion rules. So not only you must be able to delete data, but you also have to have like a process like after 5 years. If I do not need the data, which is most likely the case after 5 years, so I delete user data. So you also have to make sure that you're not just piling up data, but at some point you need to be sure that you delete the data. Otherwise, it might also be a problem.
I received email from my team, like it was a couple of months ago, like, hey, are we fine deleting all the data from the first year of Hitman because it expired? And it's a grueling and daunting email to send. Yes, you can do it because you feel like you're losing history or something. It's really weird.
Oh man. But I think deleting the data like ties a nice bow around this panel on game data analysis, because it brings things to an end. Because the chat is just sending loads of things into your direction for answering all the questions, and some hearts and just love in general. So I would send that right back to everyone who's watching. Thank you so much for joining tonight. Make sure to visit the Gamecity homepage and also the career sites of InnoGames, IO Interactive, and Epic Games if this event was interesting to you. I think my colleague Anna put all the important links into the chat already. So just click there and don't search for ages anything. And yeah, just thanks a lot for joining us in front of the screens today. Also a huge thanks to Jonas, Kevin, and Yasmin for joining us and for providing your expertise and just being a great panel overall. Thanks a lot to everyone, and good night. See you soon.
Thank you all. See you.
See you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.